Have you ever had that incredibly frustrating experience where you completely understand a complex concept like you know it inside and out, but the specific way you're being forced to prove it makes you look like you don't know anything at all?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is a universally awful feeling. You have all this knowledge secured in your brain, but the bridge you're supposed to walk across to, communicate that knowledge to the rest of the world is just completely broken.
Right. And you're just standing there stranded, being judged on your inability to cross a bridge that basically wasn't built for you in the first place. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a really powerful topic.
It really is. We are exploring a stack of materials today, ranging from state education frameworks and district inclusion handbooks to some really cutting-edge cognitive research. And all of it completely flips the script on how we think about human capability.
Yeah, we're looking at an educational philosophy that's often called radical realism. And what we're really examining today is the critical separation between the what of learning and the how of learning.
Which sounds, deceptively simple on the surface.
It does, but when you actually apply it, I mean,
Yeah.
it changes everything about how we view success, not just inside a classroom, but out in the professional world too.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the mission of this deep dive is to trace this massive, really profound shift. We're moving from the sheer frustration of looking at someone and thinking, wow, they just can't do the work, to the absolute freedom of realizing, oh, wait, they're reaching the exact same high-level concept, they're just walking through a completely different door.
Exactly. Because for decades, traditional education systems have set both learners and educators up to fail by entirely ignoring those different doors. We fall into what the sources call the one-size-fits-all academic trap.
The one-size-fits-all trap.
Yeah. Traditional environments frequently confuse two very different things. They confuse the vehicle with the destination.
Okay, I want to make sure we nail down this vocabulary immediately because it's so central to everything we're talking about today. The vehicle and the destination.
Right. So think of the destination as the conceptual understanding. It's the high-level cognitive goal of whatever you're doing.
So like analyzing the core conflict in a piece of literature.
Exactly. Or, understanding how a specific mathematical system operates. That's the destination. The vehicle, on the other hand, is just the specific mechanical skill or task used to arrive at that destination.
Okay, got it.
So it's writing a 5-paragraph essay by hand, or it's doing manual long division on a piece of scratch paper.
Wait, I have to push back here for a second. Let's look at that math example. If a student is taking a math test and they pull out a calculator, isn't that just cheating?
Well,
Because you're saying the manual long division is just a vehicle, but if they bypass it with a machine, how are they not bypassing the destination entirely?
what's fascinating here is what we can call the Zen mountain truth.
Zen mountain truth. Okay,
Okay.
I love that. What is that?
So if the actual destination of the lesson is merely the rote mechanical memorization of multiplication tables, then yes, using a calculator does bypass the destination.
Right, because the memorization is the point.
Exactly. But if the destination is understanding high-level systems, like how numbers relate to one another, or how to set up a really complex algebraic word problem, the calculator isn't a cheat at all, it's an access point.
Oh, wow.
If the destination is the peak of the mountain, the calculator is just a different hiking trail to get to the summit.
So the trap is that we are constantly confusing the tool with the intelligence itself. We look at someone struggling with the tool, the vehicle, and assume they lack the intelligence to understand the concept.
That is exactly it. And there's a brilliant piece of research in our stack today by Lewis, Anderson, and Lin, and it focuses on dyscalculia.
Right, and just for context, dyscalculia is a learning difference that specifically affects the brain's ability to process numbers and arithmetic, correct?
Yes, exactly. And the researchers break this trap down into two distinct categories. They talk about access practices versus sense-making practices.
Walk us through the cognitive mechanics of that. Like, what is actually happening in the brain of a student with dyscalculia when they sit down to do, say, a complex algebra problem?
Well, human beings have a limited amount of working memory, right?
Yes.
It's the cognitive fuel you use to actively process information in the moment.
Sure.
For a student with a dyscalculia, the mere act of manual calculation, just trying to remember what 7 times 8 is, or keeping columns of numbers perfectly aligned on a page, that consumes almost 100% of their working memory.
Wow. So they're burning all their cognitive fuel just trying to operate the vehicle.
Precisely. By the time they need to figure out the actual algebra, the sense-making part, the tank is completely empty.
They literally cannot focus on the larger mathematical concept because the sheer friction of the vehicle has completely exhausted them.
Yeah, exactly. So the researchers argue that valid access practices must include providing tools like calculators or physical manipulatives,
Right.
and removing artificial time constraints, or even fundamentally simplifying the quantities used in practice problems.
Oh, so if the goal is to understand the logic of a formula, you just give them single-digit, simple numbers.
Yes, because that allows the student to focus all their working memory on the sense-making of the formula, rather than getting derailed by a tiny arithmetic miscount that, tanks their entire grade.
That reframes the entire concept of assessment. I mean, one of our sources actually said, stop measuring fish by their ability to climb trees. And that makes so much sense now.
It really does.
But if we accept this premise, if we accept that utilizing functional tools isn't cheating, how do we actually figure out what the true destination is for any given task?
That's the core challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Because if I'm managing a team of employees or, if I'm a teacher designing a curriculum, I need to know precisely what I'm measuring so I can provide the right tools. I need to know how to differentiate with dignity.
Well, identifying the true destination requires finding the universal concept of the task. And to understand how to do that practically, we can actually look at the instructional guidelines from the Tennessee Department of Education.
Okay, what do they say?
They draw a very hard, very necessary line between equity and equality.
Those two words are thrown around constantly in corporate seminars and professional development.
Yeah.
And usually they're used completely interchangeably.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
But they represent vastly different operational strategies. Equality is an input-focused model. It means providing the exact same level of standardized opportunity and assistance to everyone, regardless of their starting point.
Right. Everyone gets the exact same box to stand on.
Exactly. But equity is an outcome-focused model. It means providing varying, individualized levels of support based on specific functional needs, so that everyone has a genuine shot at reaching the destination.
Oh, okay.
And in the context of learning, the Tennessee guidelines are incredibly strict about the difference between an accommodation and a modification.
Let's drill down into those mechanisms because that feels important.
Yeah.
What is the functional difference between an accommodation and a modification?
So an accommodation changes how you access the information. It is literally swapping out the vehicle.
Okay. Like what?
This could be text-to-speech software, a visual schedule, or even just a quiet room for testing. The destination, meaning the grade level expectation and the complexity of the concept, remains entirely untouched.
Okay, so this standard doesn't drop.
Right. But a modification changes what is expected. It lowers the destination itself.
Oh, I see.
The guidelines stress that modifications should be an absolute last resort because they fundamentally reduce learning expectations. And over time, that has severe long-term impacts on a person's ability to graduate with viable life options.
I was thinking about an analogy for this earlier. It's like trying to get a group of people to the top floor of a building.
Okay, I like this.
The physical stairs are one vehicle, right? The elevator is another vehicle entirely. If someone uses a wheelchair ramp to get into the lobby and then takes the elevator, they still reach the exact same destination.
Yes.
They're standing on the top floor. We do not look at them and say they cheated gravity. We provided an accommodation so they could access the building.
That's a great way to look at it.
But a modification would be looking at the person in the wheelchair and saying, actually, the stairs are too hard. Just stay in the lobby. We'll just call the lobby the top floor for you.
Wow. Yeah, that analogy perfectly captures the danger of modifications. You're denying them the actual view from the top floor out of a misplaced sense of pity.
Exactly.
And actually, building on your architecture analogy, the Delta School District in British Columbia uses a framework called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL.
Universal design for learning. What's the premise there?
UDL is basically the practice of building the elevator and the ramp into the blueprint of the building from day one, rather than trying to clumsily bolt them onto the outside of the building after it's already constructed.
That makes total sense in theory, but what does that actually look like on a random Tuesday morning in a classroom? How does a teacher build the elevator into a lesson plan?
Good question. So, UDL asks educators to proactively provide three things. First, multiple means of engagement, which addresses the why of learning. Second, multiple means of representation, which is the what. And third, multiple means of action and expression, which is the how.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Practically, if you're teaching the water cycle, you don't just hand out a dense textbook chapter. For representation, you offer the text, but you also offer a highly visual documentary and maybe a tactile 3D model.
And for action and expression, you don't just demand a handwritten essay to prove they understand evaporation.
Exactly. You allow them to write the essay or draw a detailed schematic diagram or record a 3-minute audio podcast explaining the cycle. The universal concept, the destination, is understanding the water cycle, the specific medium they use to show you that understanding is entirely flexible.
Think about what this means for you, listening to this deep dive right now.
Yeah.
Reflect on times in your own life or in your workplace where you were actively judged on the vehicle rather than the destination.
Boy, it happens constantly.
Right. Maybe you're a brilliant strategic thinker who processes information verbally and collaboratively. But if your manager forces you to only pitch ideas via, 20-page, densely formatted written memos, they aren't grading your strategic intelligence. They are grading your clerical formatting skills.
And the organization is entirely losing out on your actual strategic value.
Exactly.
The Delta School District's Inclusion Handbook states explicitly that inclusion is a mindset, not just a physical location. It's about valuing all learners as individuals who contribute to a greater whole by providing accessible, authentic experiences.
Yeah.
When a workplace forces a singular vehicle, it operates on exclusion, regardless of what their corporate value statement says.
Here is where it gets incredibly interesting for me because I really want to see this philosophy stress tested. Let's talk about the core concept of radical realism.
Let's do it.
How do we apply this functional access to specific, complex, neurodivergent profiles? How do we ensure students with significant learning needs still master high-level concepts?
Well, we can walk through the specific profiles outlined in the Peaceful Educator source text to see radical realism in action. Let's start with a dyslexic learner.
Okay.
As the Literacy and Dyslexia Framework notes, dyslexia is a specific learning difference, not a deficit of intelligence. The student might have significant neurological bottlenecks in visual processing speed or phonological decoding.
But they often possess incredible strengths in big-picture thinking and narrative comprehension.
Exactly. So if the universal concept being taught in an English class is understanding a narrative arc or character motivation in a novel, the access point cannot be forcing them to cold read a dense paperback.
Because the sheer act of decoding the letters on the page is a vehicle that will drain all their working memory.
Yes, the vehicle becomes the barrier. They will spend an hour just trying to accurately read 2 pages, leaving absolutely zero cognitive energy to analyze why the protagonist made a specific choice.
So the access point becomes an audiobook or text-to-speech software.
Right. They are analyzing the exact same narrative arc. They're achieving the exact same high-level conceptual destination. They are simply using auditory processing to get there instead of visual decoding.
It's so logical when you lay it out like
Yeah.
that. Let's take another profile. Consider an autistic learner.
Okay, yeah.
I'm thinking about how an autistic learner navigates a traditional classroom environment. If the concept being taught is social interdependence, understanding how different roles in society or an ecosystem rely on each other, the standard vehicle for that is usually a group project.
Oh, yeah, the classic group project.
Right, but a group project is loud, it's unstructured, socially complex, and highly unpredictable. For an autistic student, the sensory overload and the intense social demands of navigating those group dynamics are going to completely mask their actual understanding of the topic, right? How does radical realism bypass that?
It bypasses it by stripping away the mandatory social performance. The teacher recognizes that the destination is understanding the concept of interdependence, not testing the student's tolerance for chaotic group work. So the access point becomes a solitary visual mapping exercise. The student is allowed to independently diagram the societal interdependence using a software tool or a flowchart. Same conceptual destination, entirely functional vehicle.
That makes perfect sense. And we touched on the dyscalculic learner earlier, but applying radical realism to that profile means recognizing that if the concept is understanding conflict in a history class or systems in an economics problem, the access point is simply handing them the calculator.
Yes, you bypass the manual arithmetic barrier so they can actually participate in the high-level debate about supply and demand.
You see this functional approach codified beautifully into actual policy of the Florida standards access points for students with significant cognitive disabilities.
Yes, those standards are a fantastic example of this.
I was absolutely fascinated by them. They literally have essential understandings built directly into the state curriculum. They legally write these alternate vehicles into the framework.
Structural radical realism.
Exactly. Instead of demanding a written essay to prove reading comprehension, The standards explicitly allow students to use drawings or visual displays to gain information, or to confirm understanding of a text read aloud.
And it's called radical realism because it fully accepts reality. It does not pretend the disability or the neurological difference doesn't exist. It doesn't rely on, toxic positivity, but it fiercely refuses to let that difference be an artificial barrier to high-level thought.
I'm realizing as we talk through this exact mechanism is what maintains a student's fundamental dignity.
How so?
Well, you aren't treating a teenager like a toddler by giving them kindergarten-level worksheets just because they struggle to decode text.
Yeah.
That would be a modification. That would be leaving them in the lobby.
Exactly.
Radical realism keeps the professional standard high. It keeps the concept mathematically or literarily complex, but it gives them an adult tool to reach it.
That is the very essence of differentiating with dignity. You respect their intellect enough to provide a tool that matches their reality.
Which brings us to a massive psychological roadblock.
Okay.
If this approach is so universally effective and so deeply dignified for the learner, why aren't we doing it everywhere? What is the emotional barrier for the adults in the room? Why is it so incredibly hard for systems to implement radical realism?
That's a great point. The barrier is largely emotional, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it stems from something we can identify as hero-teacher guilt.
Hero-teacher guilt, that is a heavy phrase. Unpack the psychology of that for us.
Well, people who go into teaching, or even management and leadership, generally have a depth desire to help people succeed. They want to be the one who unlocks a person's potential.
Right, they care deeply.
They do. So when a teacher sees a student failing to grasp the traditional work, failing to cross that broken bridge, they feel an immense, crushing sense of personal and professional guilt. They internalize the student's struggle as their own failure.
And when you're operating out of guilt, you make decisions based on alleviating your own emotional discomfort rather than solving the actual problem.
Exactly. Which leads to two very destructive outcomes in a classroom.
What are they?
The teacher either waters down the curriculum, providing modifications out of pity, essentially deciding the student isn't capable of the high-level thought, or they give fake passing grades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they pass the student along to the next grade level just to avoid the conflict and the guilt, which obviously helps no one in the long run.
It's a complete lose-lose scenario, and it's entirely born out of good intentions.
It is. The evidence on managing social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties, or SEBD, really points us toward the necessary shift here. The research highlights the absolute necessity of an ecosystemic approach and humanistic, person-centered models.
Let's translate those academic terms into practical reality. What does an ecosystemic approach actually mean for the adult in the room?
An ecosystemic approach means you stop looking exclusively at the student as the source of the failure, and you start looking at the interaction between the student and the environment. It requires what psychologists call unconditional positive regard. You uncouple the academic struggle from the inherent value of the person.
So radical realism requires us to accept a very hard truth. Not every student will master every vehicle.
Exactly.
Not everyone is going to have beautiful cursive handwriting, or the ability to do complex long division in their head, or the working memory to cold read dense text at a glance. But every single student deserves access to the concept.
Yes. And by accepting that reality, you establish an incredibly healthy boundary. The division of labor between the teacher and the learner becomes crystal clear.
How does that division work?
The ownership of the environment is entirely on the teacher, the manager, or the system. Your job is to curate and provide the diverse access points. You are the architect. You build the ramp, you install the elevator, you provide the audiobook, the visual map, and the calculator.
But the boundary is that once the functional tool is provided, the student is responsible for using it to explore the concept. The teacher does not do the thinking for them. You just give them the functional tools to do the thinking themselves.
Exactly. Do you see what that boundary does to the hero-teacher guilt?
It completely evaporates it. I mean, that is a total paradigm shift. It frees the educator from being an enforcer of specific, rigid, outdated skills.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel guilty that a specific student can't cross the rope bridge because you aren't the bridge toll police anymore. You're a facilitator of concepts.
You're guiding them to the top of the mountain,
Yeah.
and you are finally free to celebrate whatever trail they take to meet you there. It restores pedagogical peace.
Wow.
The intense, burning frustration of they just can't do the work vanishes, and it's replaced by the collaborative intellectual challenge of how do we find the right door for this specific, unique mind?
This has been such a transformative journey today. We started by looking at how incredibly easy it is to confuse the mechanical vehicles of learning with the actual conceptual destinations.
Right.
We explored the Zen Mountain truth that tools like calculators, visual maps, and text-to-speech software aren't cheats, but vital access points that bypass working memory bottlenecks.
Yeah, and we examined the necessity of finding the universal concept in any lesson or project, ensuring we differentiate with equity and dignity, utilizing accommodations to change the how rather than modifications that lower the what.
And we saw how radical realism restores that fundamental dignity to both the learner and the teacher, eliminating the emotional trap of hero-teacher guilt and replacing it with functional, high-level success.
You know, this material leaves us with a fascinating implication that stretches far beyond the classroom, though. This raises an important question.
Oh, I always look forward to where these deep dives intersect with our own lives. What's the takeaway?
If we apply this framework of radical realism to ourselves as adults, how much of our own procrastination or our burnout is actually just us forcing ourselves to use the wrong cognitive vehicle?
Oh, that is a completely different way to look at feeling stuck.
Right. Are you beating yourself up for avoiding a massive project, labeling yourself as lazy or unmotivated, when the reality is you just haven't given yourself the correct access point? Are you judging yourself for failing to conquer the stairs when you literally have the keys to the elevator sitting right in your pocket?
I am definitely going to be auditing my own workflows and cognitive vehicles for the rest of the day.
That's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. To everyone listening, keep questioning the way you learn, keep demanding functional access points, and we will catch you next time.